Well, hello Dragons, and welcome to this instructional video for Lesson 10 Part 2, The Growth of Labor Unions. The main idea behind this economics lesson is labor unions are organizations of workers that negotiate with employers for better wages, improved working conditions, and job security. With that in mind, by the end of watching this video, you will be able to explain how labor unions developed, describe how labor unions are organized, summarize the main challenges facing unions today, and describe how government attitudes toward labor unions have changed. Now that the outcomes for this lesson have been shared with you, let's get started. As you know, in the last several decades, the government has acted to protect the rights of workers. For more than 2 centuries, however, workers in the United States have taken their own steps to secure their rights. For example, as early as 1778, printers in New York joined forces to demand higher pay. Workers also have organized into labor unions. A labor union is an organization of workers that negotiates with employers for better wages, improved working conditions, and job security. Labor unions and the government's attitude towards them and their activities have a long and varied history in the United States. Today, unions face some of their greatest challenges. You have learned about how industrialization affected the kinds of jobs available to workers. Industrialization also changed the relationship between employers and their workers. The switch from labor-intensive agriculture to capital-intensive industries meant that employers, or the owners of capital, had increasingly more power than workers, or the owners of labor. This shift in power allowed some industrial business owners to make enormous profits while paying their workers only pennies a day. Owners grew increasingly rich, while workers remained poor and ever more dependent on the low wages they were forced to accept. Thus, in the mid and late 1800s, owners had almost complete control over both pay scales and the length of the workday. In 1860, for example, the average work week for a factory laborer was 60 hours, for which he or she received just over 10 cents an hour. To make ends meet, families often sent their children to work in jobs outside the home. By 1890, nearly 20% of children aged 10 to 15 worked for wages. At that time, workplaces frequently were unsafe, noisy, and unsanitary. In 1911, more than 140 people died in a fire at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company in New York City because most of the exits were locked. In his novel The Jungle, Upton Sinclair described conditions in meatpacking plants, where people's hands were eaten away by the acid used to help remove the wool from sheep carcasses, and where infectious diseases like tuberculosis thrived and spread in the rooms where meat was cooked. Recognizing that they could bring about change only by acting together, workers formed a number of labor unions. The 2 major types that developed were craft unions and industrial unions. A craft union is composed of one trade's skilled workers. For example, plumbers, electricians, or carpenters. The International Union of Bricklayers and Allied Craftsmen is a craft union. An industrial union, on the other hand, includes all workers in an industry, whether they are skilled, semi-skilled, or unskilled. The United Auto Workers is an industrial union. The most successful of the early unions was the Knights of Labor, an industrial union that was open to workers from nearly all trades. A loosely structured organization, the Knights brought together skilled and unskilled workers from a wide variety of crafts and industries. Additionally, the union offered membership to women and African Americans. At the height of its power in 1886, the Knights had nearly 700,000 members. The Knights of Labor supported setting an 8-hour workday, ending child labor, in replacing capitalism with a system of consumers and producers cooperatives. The Knights worked to achieve social and political reform through a combination of marches, demonstrations, and violent protests. The loose structure of the Knights of Labor and its support of radical political change eventually led to its downfall. In addition, when the Knights attempted to improve the working conditions of unskilled laborers, skilled members refused to support the union's actions. Without the support of skilled workers, the union began to lose power. By 1900, it was no longer a significant force. The modern period of the U.S. labor movement began in 1886, when a loose association of craft unions organized as the American Federation of Labor, or AFL. Samuel Gompers, the first AFL president, felt that unions should focus their efforts on gaining higher wages and better working conditions, rather than striving for social changes such as the cooperatives supported by the Knights. The AFL mainly included unions of skilled workers, excluding unions of unskilled workers. In 1914, the AFL had more than 2 million members. By 1920, its membership had doubled. The 1920s, however, were difficult for labor unions. Internal struggles plagued the AFL, and opponents challenged Gompers' leadership. When he died in 1924, the presidency of the union changed hands, but the internal struggles did not disappear. At the same time, a strong anti-union sentiment arose as many unions supported radical platforms and actions. Businesses, with the aid of the government, attacked organized labor. Many business owners set up open shops, in which workers did not have to join a union. Unions, of course, preferred closed shops, in which workers could be hired only if they first joined a union. Massive unemployment during the Great Depression of the 1930s decreased the AFL's membership. The ongoing internal disputes, particularly over the inclusion of unskilled workers, eventually pushed several AFL unions to form a new, separate labor organization. Although the AFL was made up primarily of craft unions, a few industrial unions did join. To further widen the AFL's membership, John L. Lewis, president of the United Mine Workers, or UMW, formed the Committee for Industrial Organizations within the AFL in 1935. One of the committee's main goals was to organize both unskilled and semi-skilled workers in several industries and bring them into the American Federation of Labor. By 1937, AFL leaders, determined to keep the organization focused on craft unions, had expelled Lewis and all of the industrial unions that he had helped organize. A year later, Lewis became president of the newly named Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO. Under his leadership, millions of unskilled industrial workers, including women as well as African Americans and other minorities, were organized. Large industrial unions that joined the CIO included the United Steelworkers, the USW, the United Automobile Workers, the UAW, and Lewis's own UMW. As workers in many industries and regions joined together to claim their rights, labor unions began to structure themselves in certain ways. What are these forms of organization? Local unions are made up of people who work for a particular company or in a particular area. One local union might be made up of all the workers at the Fantastic Furniture Company. Another might include only saw operators from several lumber companies in the same city. At the next level of organization, local unions from different parts of the country are organized into national unions. Suppose, for example, that the Saw Operators Union of Toledo is one chapter of the Saw Operators Union of America. Although union members are more likely to be active in their local unions, national unions often are better known to the public and hold greater political and economic power because of their size. National unions provide their local chapters with leadership on national issues, as well as lawyers and other specialized staff to support local causes. One of the best-known national organizations is the AFL-CIO. By the mid-1950s, union leaders in the AFL and the CIO acknowledged that all laborers, skilled and unskilled alike, had similar economic concerns. In 1955, the two organizations merged, forming the AFL-CIO. Today, this organization includes dozens of smaller unions and more than 13 million members across the nation. Many labor unions are not affiliated with the AFL-CIO. For example, the National Education Association is an independent union with around 3 million members. Local unions may also be independent of national organizations. In recent decades, the labor movement in the United States has experienced a period of crisis. Union membership has dropped dramatically. The three main reasons for the decline are employer opposition, changes in employment patterns, and negative public opinion. The managements of many companies have opposed the development of unions because increased wages for workers mean lower profits for owners. Rather than attacking the unions directly, however, in recent years some employers have tried to make unions seem unnecessary by changing company labor policies to recognize the invaluable role of workers. For example, some employers have made workers part of management teams. Others have allowed employee representatives to sit on their boards of directors, thus giving workers a voice in company decision-making. Other companies simply try to avoid dealing with unions. For example, some companies in the Northeast and the Midwest, where unionism traditionally has been strong, have moved their headquarters or production facilities to cities in the South and the Southwest, where unions tend to hold less power. Similarly, some companies have moved production to other countries, where wages are low and a lack of unionization enables employers to cut costs significantly. A second factor contributing to the decline of unions in the United States is the shift from a manufacturing-based economy to a service-based economy. Labor union membership traditionally has been strong in the manufacturing sector, such as the automobile and appliance industries. However, employment in this sector has dropped in recent years, while employment of office and service workers, who generally have low union participation rates, has increased. Additionally, growing numbers of women and teenagers have entered the labor force. Although unions do not exclude them, such workers have not been at the center of union organizing efforts and often have not been attracted to union membership. Thus, as employment of women and teenagers has increased, the percentage of employees involved in unions has declined. The third factor in the decline of unions is the public's generally negative view of them. Many people, including economists, feel that union demands for higher wages and increased benefits have encouraged companies to move their factories outside of the country, thereby decreasing the number of jobs available to workers in the United States. Some also believe that union members' wages are too high considering the skill level needed to perform their jobs. In addition, the public has at times opposed the actions of union leaders, some of whom have been accused of accepting political favors in exchange for lowering union demands. Others are thought to have used violence and other offensive tactics to maintain their power. These incidents have contributed to a negative public attitude toward unions. One union response to the drop in membership has been to adopt a more cooperative spirit in their dealings with management. For example, during the 1980s, labor and management in some industries agreed to wage and benefit reductions to help their companies remain competitive in the marketplace. Additionally, labor and management have come together on other national issues. For example, both groups have opposed rapidly rising insurance costs for businesses. To increase membership, organized labor has addressed new issues that are of concern for workers, such as skill training, career development programs, quality of life in the workplace, and worker involvement in decision-making on the job. Other issues, such as the availability of daycare facilities, are designed to appeal to parents and other specific groups of workers. Unions also have attempted to gain members by improving the training they provide to union organizers. Unions also are hiring professional union organizers to explain the benefits of membership to non-union workers. Finally, unions have experimented with a number of incentives to make membership more attractive. For example, unions have offered incentives such as life and health insurance plans, retirement accounts, low-interest credit cards, and legal services. The government's responses to unions have changed over time. During the 1800s, the government generally favored business interests over those of labor unions. For example, in 1894, workers at Chicago's Pullman Palace Car Company factory, which produced sleeping cars for trains, protested wage cuts by refusing to work. Eugene G. Debs, leader of the American Railway Union, then urged union members to refuse to work on any train with a Pullman car. When railroad traffic across the country was disrupted, the railroad companies attached mail cars to Pullman cars. This action caused the government to oppose the protests on the grounds that they were preventing mail delivery. Federal troops were sent to enforce order, and protesters were jailed. The government's attitude toward unions changed during the first decade of the 1900s, however, when the country entered a period of social and political reform. The U.S. Congress and state legislatures passed laws protecting the rights of workers. Since 1940, though, legislation once again has tended to place limits on the power of unions. So that's the way it is with Lesson 10 Part 2, The Growth of Labor Unions. At this point, you should know that labor unions developed following industrialization in the United States and the awareness of working conditions in the labor force. Unions are organized on the local and national levels, with other unions being independent. Employer opposition, employment pattern changes, and negative public opinions are the challenges affecting labor unions today, and the government has changed over time, from siding with management to passing laws that protect workers and unions. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to have the entire catalog of economics videos available at your fingertips. Click the subscribe button and then click the follow bell to receive notifications as to when the channel is updated. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in class, Dragons.